Welcome to Reimagining Mathematics Education. With a focus on connecting math, community, and culture, we are just delighted to be here with you and to have this opportunity to connect folks from across the province. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I work and I learn on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, the Musqueam peoples, whose historical relationship with the land continues to this day. I'm respectful of this place, all the places that I inhabit. I also work and live in Syilx territory and Sinaiix territory, and the countless generations of Indigenous peoples who have cared for them. It is a part of my work each day to be actively anti-racist and anti-colonial, and as one step on that journey, I share with you a couple examples of maps that, instead of using colonial names, recognize the nations and language groups of what we now call British Columbia. This exciting project is the first time we've done this, and it's a partnership with many groups collaborating together to think about how we can take up mathematics and numeracies in ways that are place conscious and welcome the diverse knowledges of our students, in particular our Indigenous students. And so our partners, our supporters include the Indigenous Math Network, the David Robitaille International STEM Education Network, Dogwood 25, which I know you'll learn about more in a later session. We're also supported by the BC Ministry of Education and the Rural Education Advisory. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say how grateful I am to Dr. Cynthia Nicol for jumping on board with me when I floated this idea. We've been looking for ways to collaborate, and with my research area in rural education and her area as the David Robitaille Professor of Mathematics and Science, we just thought, what a great opportunity to create access for everyone to be part of this conversation about what we're doing, what we could do, and nurturing our children in really powerful ways.
Great. Thanks, Leyton, and welcome everybody. My name is Cynthia Nicol, as Leyton mentioned, and I'm in the Department of Curriculum and Pedagogy, and as Leyton mentioned, hold the David Robitaille Professorship in Mathematics and Science Education. And it's my pleasure to participate co-hosting this webinar series on connecting math, community, and culture. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm currently on the traditional unceded ancestral territory of the Hunkaminam speaking people, right here where the Fraser River splits into the North Arm and the South Arm before meeting again in the Pacific Ocean. And I have to say that I really come to know this place well over the past 18 months, especially how my memory in general and experience and place are just so deeply connected and really embodied. So before we go further, I'd like to invite you to introduce yourself and the lands that you're currently on. And you could do that by typing that into the chat. So please go ahead to do that. And while you're doing that, I'll introduce the rest of our team. So my colleagues and I have helped organize this session and share their ideas. And we have Kammi Clark from North Vancouver, Charli-Rae Dougherty from Quesnel, Melody Watson from Vancouver Island, the north part, Stephanie Maki from North Vancouver. You already know Leyton, and Joanne Archibald from UBC, Janice Novakowski from Richmond and UBC, and me from UBC as well. So our theme for this, which is the first in our series, is teaching and learning math through place and land. And I'll just start by saying that all places have their own power, their own agency, their own personality, and each place offers a way of bringing forth an educational relationship. So in this first session of our series, we're sharing teachers' stories of math and place and land that might help us imagine mathematics education differently. So you'll see through the various stories shared by Kammi and Charli-Ray and Melody and Stephanie that math and place and land teach about the importance of relationships, of being interconnected, of sharing resources, of respect and reciprocity, for codependency and survival, and all of this includes mathematical actions. So being mathematical, attending to patterns like what you see in these mushrooms that I took this picture of near my place, like attending to these patterns and what changes and what stays the same has enabled us as humans and more than humans to survive in places all over the earth. So we hope these stories that you'll be listening to of math in place provide us with a way to kind of deepen our own understanding and appreciation of place, of community, and what it means to be what American mathematician Francis Su, who wrote a beautiful book recently, calls mathematical adventurers. So taking on that adventure of being a mathematical adventurer. So let's take on what Ojibwe writer and storyteller Richard Wagamese says when he wrote about how it begins, as all things do, with stories. So we want to invite you to gather around this virtual fire, to listen to the crackle of the logs and that snap of the cedar burning, and kind of feel the warmth and the feeling of togetherness and the wonder that's maybe kind of sparked by the possibilities that these stories offer about math in place. And as you listen, you're welcome to put any questions or comments that you have in the chat. And after two stories of teachers sharing their work, we'll pause for an audience or a question kind of interlude and have a mystery question for you. So you can respond and we can respond to your questions and we can have a little bit of discussion. So our first story is told by Kammi Clark, who speaks to the power of connecting with place through math in an urban context within the lands around the school. So Kammi.
Thank you, Cynthia. Can you move to the next slide for me, please? Thanks. So I'm Kammi Clark, and I come from a settler background, and I'm the vice principal at Norgate Humbolston Elementary School here in North Vancouver. We are situated on the unceded territory of the Squamish and the Tsleil-Waututh Nations, and approximately half of the students at my school are Indigenous, primarily from the Squamish Nation. Our school is in a suburban area, surrounded by both urban areas and industrialized areas. We are also very close to the Capilano Reserve, where most of our students live. Next, there we go. Last year, in my role as learning support teacher, I worked in most classes, and I was able to create a school-wide math community by exploring spirals and the Fibonacci sequence in grades ranging from grades 1 to grade 7. Our exploration was based on these three guiding principles that you see here on the screen. We wanted to teach with the land and our place, to teach through story, and to connect to Indigenous culture and teachings. We did many different activities throughout our exploration. We read stories, we watched videos, we looked for Fibonacci numbers in pine cones, we went walking in the community, and we created dream catchers at the end. Today, I want to specifically talk to you about one part of our exploration, that learning about spirals and creating our own spiral art. We wanted to connect our students to the place where we lived and using the land to support their learning. And we were inspired to do this because of the book Squirrel by Squirrel by Joyce Sidman. By starting with story, we were looking to engage the students in mathematics in a meaningful, non-traditional way. The book itself is full of beautiful images that we encourage students to really look at and discover all of the real world examples of spirals. We then connected spirals to our place by going for community walks and searching for them. These images here on the screen are examples of ones that we found on our walk. After reading the story and talking about where spirals exist in the natural world, we wanted students to be able to create their own spirals, their own examples. We could have done this in lots of different ways, but we decided to bring the math classes outside to make things more hands-on and more meaningful and allowing the students to really experience the mathematics in the moment. Since we were in a relatively urban area, we were somewhat limited in terms of our access to nature, but we explored our school grounds and used what we could to build spiral art and patterns on our field and on our playground. So here are some examples of the spirals created by our grade 3 students. These students noticed 3 different kinds of spirals when we were looking at the Swirl by Swirl book. So they worked with these different kinds of spirals and created patterns with found objects on top of their spiral templates that they had traced into the gravel field. Throughout our explorations, when we created spirals on the school grounds, we left them there for the rest of the school to enjoy and wonder about. We also took photos of them and displayed them on a bulletin board in the middle of the school. This helped build community as students started to talk to each other about what they were learning, and they looked forward to participating themselves. Got lots of questions about when is it our turn? Grade 5 students also created their own versions. Theirs look a little bit different than from the grade 3s though. Note this one on the top there that used color. The other one that here on the right underneath that shows growth in a couple of different ways, not only by the spiral spreading out, but also by adding more leaves to the arm of the spiral as it goes around as well. These students were exploring mathematics without even realizing that they were being mathematicians. While the students were creating these spirals, I was able to take advantage of the teachable moments and name the mathematics that I was noticing them doing. This is something that we're not always able to do when we're working in a classroom with more traditional mathematics lessons, textbooks, and worksheets. The grade 7 students, being who they are, they went big. They worked together to collaborate to make a few very large spirals that took up the entire field, as you can see here on the photos. When working with the older students, we were really impressed with the high level of engagement that we saw. Students who typically did not enthusiastically engage in mathematics within the walls of their classroom, they were active participants when we were creating these spirals outside. So what am I learning? What did I learn in all of this? Well, a big takeaway that I have from all of this is that land and place are powerful teachers, and they are tools for motivation and engagement that we all need to tap into. Place is so much more than the classroom. I'm transferring this learning into my own teaching this year, where I have started everything by basing our learning in our place where we are in the world, in math and in other subject areas as well. By exploring the same mathematical ideas across different grades, we were building community within our community. We were all working towards a common goal that brought mathematics to life in a real world context. Reflecting back now, I would have loved to have had the older students meet with the younger students so that they could share conversation about what they were learning and noticing about the spirals and where they could be found in nature, along with talking about how they created their own art pieces. I like to think they were having these conversations when they discovered them outside during recess and lunch, but it wasn't a structured event. Given that our school is in a very urban setting, if I were to do this exploration again, I'd like to see what would happen if we had access to more forested and park-like areas. My prediction is that the student engagement would continue to increase and students would be able to make more meaning and build further on their understanding of the real-world applications of math concepts that we were working with. That being said, I feel like we need to take advantage of our place no matter where it is, and that's my huge takeaway. You don't need to wait for the perfect setting. You need to use what you have. So now I'm going to pass on to Charli-Ray, and she will expand on this notion about place by including her local community.
Thank you, Kammi. So my name is Charli-Rae Dougherty. I'm a learning assistance teacher in a K-7 school in Quesnel, and I'm currently working on a Master's of Math Education through UBC. I am very grateful to live, work, play, and be presenting today from the traditional territory of the Lataco Dene Nation. The activity that I'm sharing today came in response to a goal that I had at school. I had a group of grade 7 students with learning disabilities and other conditions who needed to learn a grade 3 math concept. And I really wanted to ensure that their learning was authentic, meaningful, and engaging. And if you've ever taught grade 7 students, you know how much of a challenge this can be. So I approached this with 3 strategies. Most importantly, I wanted to make their learning real. Often, teachers take easily applicable math concepts and give students artificial practice tasks. So instead of providing an abstract task, my hope was to provide something that was grounded in our community. Ideally, with this task, and with any other task, students would walk out of the classroom and see math in the neighborhood cafe, in the nature parks, and all the other places around us. Secondly, I wanted to tell a story. Elementary kids love stories. And in my experience, stories have always been a sure way to increase engagement. From kindergarten to grade 7, stories are always a good go-to. A 3-act task is a single story broken into 3 parts. And after each part, students engage in mathematical thinking, noticing, wondering, and problem solving. And I'll explain more about the 3-act task as I go through the activity that I'm sharing today. And finally, I really wanted to ensure that all of my students could engage in the same task. The group that I was working with had a diverse set of abilities, and I wanted to make sure that the task was something that they could all work on instead of doing separate leveled work. So for some background information, this photo is of a local cafe called Bliss. It's well known in the community for many reasons. They do lots of catering. They are well known for sponsoring different things and just being very supportive in the community. And they're particularly well known because of their proximity to our only high school. So to start the task, can you go back one? To start the task, I would show my students this picture. And I would ask my students, what do you notice? What do you wonder? Where's the math? Why am I showing you this picture during math? And again, in any group of grade 7s, you can expect one to say, I don't know, why are you showing us this during math? So it's really fascinating to pique their interest in a different way from what they're used to in a math class. Okay, next. So after we have that discussion, I would introduce the story. So at the beginning of this story, myself and another teacher go out for lunch. And after I order, I look in my wallet and then I slowly look up at Mrs. Gauthier. At this point, I would ask the students, what's the problem? And what information would you need to solve this problem? So after some brainstorming, I would continue the story and tell the students what I ordered and how much money I had. And then I would ask them, what solutions to the problem are there? So this task was intentionally left open-ended so that the students could find a solution that both makes sense to them and that they could solve mathematically. So at this point, before finding out the ending of the story, the students would spend some time developing possible solutions. So there was no right answer. I was only hoping that they would practice mathematical operations with numbers and decimals. The end of the story tells us that Mrs. Gauthier paid for my order and she didn't expect me to pay her back. So after completing this task, I asked the students to share what they thought of the activity. And this group of students struggles with communication a little bit, but overall, they said that they enjoyed it. Engagement, check. But the students really wanted to know if the story was real or not, which I thought was fascinating. And it also confirmed that they were genuinely interested in the story. So double check on engagement. And finally, every student in the group declared that they were craving bliss. Some said that they were going to ask their parents if they could go that night. Triple check, score. Sometimes math lessons do go as planned after all. So to me, this was a silly little story based on a photo that I took on my weekly chai trip. but the students were truly interested in it. And it showed me that I can easily create my own math stories, real or not, based on the places around me, and use those stories to inspire wonder. So there are possibilities to take this activity further. Some mathematical extensions could be calculating change, adding a tip, adding taxes, those kinds of things. There's opportunities for cross-curricular connections. So you could do a social studies exploration about what local businesses are, why they're important to our community, why it's important to support them. Or you could engage in a giving back activity and look at what is missing. So you could create a community map highlighting the local businesses or other important areas. And that mapping one is really interesting because it's not just a project for the sake of learning, it's an opportunity to give back to our community by providing something meaningful. So in this past year, especially, I've been realizing that math stories are everywhere when I start looking. From geometry and patterns in nature, back up, from geometry and patterns in nature to number operations in a cafe or cross-curricular topics such as mapping. Math stories really are everywhere once you start intentionally looking for them. So most elementary math concepts have applications in everyday life. We just have to look for the math stories. And if we ground our math stories in local places, we can learn about our community and we can learn from our community. And hopefully this will help our students gain a sense of appreciation, pride, and wonder about the places around us. So that concludes my presentation, and I want to thank you for listening to me today. And we're going to have a short interlude to answer some questions from the participants today.
So at this time, we'd like to invite you to add any questions that you might have either for Kammi or Charli-Ray into the chat, and we'll gather those questions and then post some of them to our speakers. And while you're thinking of a question to post in the chat, you might want to have a look at the image that Cynthia has added here to this slide. And what do you notice and what do you wonder about this image? And think about the connections to place, community, and culture, and what mathematics lives in that image or practice. So that's just to inspire your own questioning. But if we have any questions for the speakers, I'm just going to pause for a moment and give you an opportunity to add those to the chat.
I can see that there's a question for me in the chat. I can just read it for everybody if they can't see it. It says, what were some of the challenges you had teaching these backgrounds as someone from a settler background? And I struggle with this deeply. I've wrestled with this myself as I go through this. I think something that I have really come to learn is the power of reaching out and asking questions of people who are the knowledge keepers, and then asking permission to share. It's not my knowledge to share. I am not the knowledge keeper, but if I get permission to share it, I can share it. I'm very lucky in my school that I have 3 amazing Indigenous support workers, cultural teachers, who came alongside me and were helping with me with teaching some of the more specific Squamish teachings and things like that. But most districts do have Indigenous education teams, and I encourage you to reach out to them and learn from them. I found grounding myself in place, while that is an Indigenous way of teaching, is an access point. So coming outside, getting outside, learning about our place and sharing the stories of our place and connecting to the land, is an easy access point. If you're sharing stories, traditional stories about the place, then yes, you do need to get permission and work together with your Indigenous community, your local Indigenous community, but that seemed to help quite a bit. I hope I've answered that question.
Thank you, Kammi. Nikki has a question for you, Kammi. Did you learn about any new spirals from your students?
Yes. So the book Spirals by Spiral, Swirl by Swirl, I always want to call it Spirals by Spirals. But the book Swirl by Swirl has lots of beautiful images in it. So we did a lot of brainstorming about different kinds of spirals and where you would see them in the natural world. And then we started talking about galaxies. Like we started getting really, really big. And so the three different directions that different kinds of spirals they came up were the ones that like swirl like this, the one with the arms that come out like a sunshine, and then one that looks like a tornado. The one that looks like a tornado was one I hadn't actually noticed in the book. So that by opening the kids' eyes to the pictures and really teaching them how to look and investigate, they really kind of got there. In terms of new spirals beyond what was in the book, we hadn't quite gotten there yet. So I'd be curious to see what would happen if I reintroduce this again.
Thank you. Just a question coming up, maybe Joanne, if you could address this a little bit. I think there's this tension between outdoor learning and learning from place, and then connecting Indigenous knowledge and teachings within that experience. And the tension that there might be for those of us that are settlers or of non-Indigenous ancestry. So, Joanne, are you able to make a few comments about that?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I think just getting outside in nature, on land, centers us, and I think it helps us. And I appreciate Kammi's response that, being out on the land in nature is an access point for us to enter and to get us ready and maybe centered to engage in this important work. And I think when we prepare ourselves and thinking of we do have to address how colonization has impacted everybody. And we have to think about how math and education has shaped our perspectives and have that. But as we've thought about it, but then when we're out in the land and then we make connections to individuals, Indigenous community members, when we're thinking about Indigenous knowledges that, when we're open and ready, those community guides will be there to help us. And then I think have to ensure that we take time and effort and have patience to develop those relationships that will then guide us. And so I think it's important that we become ready to engage, and that takes time.
Thank you, Joanne. I have a question for Charli-Ray, and you mentioned 3-act tasks, and I'm not sure if everyone attending today would be familiar with 3-act tasks. So if you could share a little bit more about that, and maybe some resources for people to look into, because it's such a lovely connection to story.
Yeah, so I actually learned about 3-act tasks during my master's program, and they're really interesting. I don't have any specific resources, but if you just Google search 3-act task, a lot of websites come up. There are these ways of breaking a story into pieces and getting the children to ask questions and wonder about what could come next. And every 3-act task, every story has a problem that has some mathematical solution. Well, in my experience, in the way I've used them anyways. So if you take a story and find the different places that students could ask questions and wonder. So at the beginning of my story, it was, I opened my wallet and I looked up, and I didn't say what the problem was. That was for the students to figure out. And then we carried on with the story, and I added some numbers in so that there would be a mathematical problem, and then asked them to find some solutions. And in traditional 3-act tasks, there's always one solution. So they get the information they need, and then they find that answer. And then the last part of the story reveals, oh, did they get the right answer? But for me, because of the group of students that I worked with, I really wanted to make sure it was open-ended. but they're really fun and they can be really short and you can make them yourselves pretty easily, but there's lots of websites online that can give you inspiration. There's some really cool ones that are videos as well. So you play a part of the video and then you pause it. And then the students ask their questions and do their brainstorming, and then you play a little bit more and pause it and carry on that way.
Great. Thank you, Charli-Ray. And a few people have put some of those resources to access in the chat, so you can have a look there as well if you're interested. All right, I'm just looking at the time, Cynthia, and I think we will move on to the third story from one of the educators from BC, and I think it's Melody.
All right, hopefully you've got me now and my sound's okay. Hi everyone, I'm Melody Watson and I'm joining you today from Claclascuties or Swing-Tula in the traditional territories of the Kwakwaka'wakw Nations. I'd like to recognize the elders, knowledge keepers, and peoples who share these traditional territories with us so we can live, learn, work, and play side by side. I am fortunate to have been teaching here in School District 85 on the northern end of Vancouver Island for the last 25 years. In my current role, I am principal of A.J. Elliott Elementary School, which you'll see up on your screen. We are a small but mighty school. We are 33 students strong in grades K to 7. Our school began a math inquiry back in 2014. And our work was born out of a desire to move away from teaching math in units and instead teach math cyclically, teaching all the concepts all year long, deepening understanding as we went, in a hope that we would deepen our students' number sense and improve their problem solving. And over the last 2 years of this inquiry, we've moved more and our focus has evolved to a focus on incorporating more place-based learning into math and more culture as well. And one way that we've done this is through story. And I'd like to share with you today 2 examples of some of the many activities we've done in the last couple of years, where we've used the story of our forest and also the story found in West Coast First Nations art as ways to build that connection to place and deepen students' understanding of mathematical concepts. And through doing this, our students have been learning to read stories and language of the forest and art mathematically. So this slide that you'll see now is about one of the activities that we did with our students, forest walks. And forest walks have happened regularly throughout this inquiry. We started by taking students out onto the land and asking them what they noticed, what they wondered, and where they saw the math. And starting this way helped our kids to see the connectedness that exists out in the forest, the connectedness to place, connecting to land. And also they were starting to notice connections across the curriculum, not just in math. One of the first forest walks that we did, we were looking at similarities and differences. And we were looking at the trees in particular and asking the students what they saw that was similar and different between the different species of trees in the forests, looking at their bark, looking at the branches, the leaves, the exposed roots. And these pictures that you're seeing, we are so fortunate. This is the forest that backs onto my school. It's our $1 million playground, as I like to call it. And doing that, the students became more aware of the different species and were able to start identifying them and name those species. And I connected this to the work of Robin Wall-Kimmerer in Braiding Sweetgrass. She's the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, where she has been known to say that children today can name more than 100 different corporate logos, but only about 10 different plants or living things like trees. And I think in learning to name them and give them a name, we are putting a lot of power behind that and support and starting to open up the kids more to thinking about reciprocity, being more connected to the land, looking after the land. Another walk that we did, which you'll see in the picture in the bottom right, was looking for pattern. And it's a favorite walk of the students. I had noticed before that they would notice pattern inside all the time. Anytime I'd be doing something on the smart board, they'd, oh, that's in a pattern, even if it wasn't intentional. But yet outside, I wasn't hearing those things as often. When we went outside intentionally looking for pattern, they were finding it everywhere. They were finding patterns in the colorings and the cones in that bottom right-hand image. They were finding patterns in the rings of the tree trunks or in how the branches grew from the trees. And now I'm noticing more patterns being noticed outside and not just inside. Another activity that we did, aside from forest walks, if we can go to the next slide, was shapes in our forest. And I started off with an image similar to this. And if I asked all of you here today to name some shapes for me, I imagine I would hear square, circle, triangle, trapezoid, maybe. And that's the same thing I would hear from my students. And if I showed you this next image, though, this is a piece of West Coast art. It's called The Mouse Woman, and it's by Billy Jovanovic, a Haida artist. If I showed an image like this and asked the students what shapes they saw, they probably wouldn't be able to name them at first until we built that mathematical language. And so what we did is we started to look at those different elements in form line art. And so if you could go to the next one, Cynthia. We started to look between similarities and differences and build the language. And it was really interesting. The kids would notice things like the trigon was similar to the triangle, or the quadron was like the quadrilaterals. And once they had that language to be able to talk about those different design elements, we went out onto the land. And this next slide, there it is, was another sort of type of forest hunter shape hunt. And instead of, I used to take my kids on the land looking for triangles and squares, and they'd find them in the playground. This was out in the forest, and they were looking for S shapes, U shapes, ovoids. Sometimes you had to look at it, from a different perspective or be a little creative, but they really did find some wonderful examples in the forest. You don't usually find those right angled shapes in the forest, but these design elements from Formline Design are everywhere. And the kids recorded what they saw, took pictures, shared with each other. And in the bottom right, you can see that they were even starting to make their own creations, trying to use some of those design elements. And I know I'm short on time, so I just wanted to share that story was often a jumping off point for a lot of the work we did over the last 2 years, and just share with you 2 other activities that spanned over weeks and weeks. But cedar weaving was one, and we used Magical Beings of Haida Gwaii with the story of Cedar Sisters as a jumping off point for some paper weaving, and then weaving with real cedar, looking at all the math in weaving, and then bentwood boxes, where we used Raven Brings the Light as that jumping off point. And the kids had to create their own boxes without using standard measuring tools. And I'd love to go into more detail about those another time if I get the opportunity. And so as a culminating activity for this inquiry last year, we went back out into the land with cedar seedlings to give back to the land as a way to show reciprocity, one of the components of Indigenous story work. And it was just a really wonderful experience for the students to plant those cedar trees in the forest and give back for all the learning that we had been given from the cedar trees. Now they could give back to the forest. And I just want to thank all of you for allowing me to share my school's story with you. And my story is, concluded with reciprocity. And I'd like to pass on now to Stephanie Maki, who's going to continue with her work sharing that builds on story through the harvesting of maple sugar.
Thank you, Melody. So my name is Stephanie Maki, and I am coming to you from the unceded and traditional lands of the Squamish and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I am of mixed ancestry, and I'm currently the vice principal at an elementary school in North Vancouver, and I've been part of the Indigenous education team for over 8 years. So I'm going to be talking about an example from a grade 5-6 class last year that we're going to be looking at maple harvesting in the numeracy and looking at a holistic approach that's centered on story. So as Kammi mentioned before, they were looking at spirals, and we were using the same book to explore spirals in nature and outside and in math. And we took that idea of the spirals and applied it to sugar bush and maple harvesting. And the sugar bush is the name for sugar trees or maple syrup in Anishinaabe or Ojibwe territory. And to carry on with the spirals, introducing this unit to the students, I shared 2 Squamish oral stories of Sanaka, who is the two-headed serpent. And we built on previous knowledge of local Indigenous shapes and drawing. And we had collaborated with one of our Indigenous cultural workers, Gordon Dick, who is Tsleil-Waututh and Lil'wat. So students had a background and a knowledge of the form line shapes. But I gave Gordon a heads up that we had looked at spirals and shared this story. So he came in and drew the two-headed serpent as a spiral. So students were centered in local community and story and were connected to place. I always try to start with local story and make sure that we're connected to place. Next slide, please. So throughout the years, students had heard local stories, and one of the stories that they knew quite well was the story of the 2 sisters in the land that they were on. But I also tried to connect students to other places. And one of the stories that they knew very well was the story of Sky Woman and Turtle Island. So making connections between local place and the place that we were going to explore. Go to the next slide, please. So we were told that we would be having a visit from the Cheakamus Center to allow students to explore and to learn about maple tapping with the big leaf maple in British Columbia. And in the North Vancouver School District, we have the Cheakamus Center, which is our outdoor school. And normally the students would go there, but due to COVID, they had to send someone from Cheakamus Center to us. But looking at the timeline and having someone come and share about maple tapping in British Columbia, I really wanted students to have a concept of place and community and to learn where sugar water comes from and that it existed somewhere before settlers started tapping sugar in British Columbia, and to learn the process and the protocol, but also see the math and the work that went into sugar tapping. So I gave them the big question, where does maple syrup come from? And so a lot of the students shared, Aunt Jemima, it's in a bottle and it pours. So we started to explore where it would come from. And we compared local knowledge of seasonal rounds with the seasonal rounds in the Anishinaabe Ojibwe territory. And I was fortunate that I do have some family stories to add to that. Next slide, please. So the students knew the seasonal rounds for the local area here. So March is the herring time and April is sasky or salmonberry time. So I introduced them to the knowledge that the sugar harvest happens in March and April, depending on the climate and the temperature. And so we looked at temperatures and when they thought it would be the right time to harvest the sugar water. But we also grounded it in story. So they knew the local seasonal rounds, but then I introduced a story that has some math in the story. And I shared with them, next slide, please, the story of Nana Bajo. And Nana Bajo is one of the first people, but he's also takes care of community. And in the story, the students discovered that the people in the community were lazy and they were just sitting around drinking sugar water all the time. And so Nana Bajo filled the trees full of water and made that sugar water can only be harvested at a specific time. So it was introducing that idea of ratios. Even though they didn't know it was ratios, it was in the story. And so they were connecting with the story and the ceremony and the connection to land and the teachings that come through that story. But then I also looked further into, I couldn't bring anybody from that community to us. So I used from the National Center for Collaboration. And that story of Nana Bajo, there's a version in Keepers of the Earth, but we also looked at a poem about the sugar moon, which also relates back to Nana Bajo. Next slide, please. that was just a quote that also when we were looking at the ceremony and the process and the protocol, really wanted students to understand this idea of ceremony, that we treat the maple syrup with respect, the same as we would wild rice. And it was that understanding that when we're out in the land and we're on nature, that we have to show the same respect that we show ourselves. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So some of the stories that explored math. The National Center for Collaboration has elders who recorded stories. And the first one there explains how to recognize a maple tree. So how do you tell by the size, the shape, the color of the tree, and the color of the leaves? And in the second video, the elder explains how to collect maple syrup, how much you can take at a time, how to tap the tree. But she also talks about the work. So you can collect 40 gallons of the sugar water, but the process to boil it down will give you 1 gallon. So again, it was introducing students not only to substances, mixtures, it was introducing them again to the whole concept of ratios. So we did a lot of conversation about how much time it would take to collect 40 gallons, how much time it would take to boil it down, and looking at, we did a few little experiments about how those ratios work in real life applications, and then how to store the sugar water. And we also did predictions on what it would taste like. How much sugar do you think you would need to add to make it sweet? And would it be what they were expecting, what they were used to from the store shelves? Next, please. So then we did some comparison of the size and the shape of a big leaf maple to the sugar maple in Ontario or the Anishinaabe territory. And so we looked at the size of the trunks, we looked at how long it takes to grow in order to be ready to be tapped. And we used growth charts for some leaves, and we did some comparison of how big the leaves were, introducing those math ideas of size and measurement. But then the Cheakamus Center had sent us data. So they sent us how much syrup they had tapped over time in a spreadsheet. We used those spreadsheets to create charts. And then when they came to us, we were able to discuss that. And so the students had the idea that it was 4-to-1 for Anishinaabe ways. But then when Cheakamus Center came to us, they learned that here it's 3-to-1. So comparisons of the ratios, the measurements, the trees. They also sent us data on which tree produced the most maple syrup, how many days it took, and what the weather was like on that day. So we had all that local information to work with. And the students didn't realize that they were doing math when we were looking at which tree produced the most syrup, how cold it was, and the temperature. So even though they were exploring all these ideas, they didn't make the connection to math until we later talked about it. Next slide, please. So at the top there is a picture of the longhouse at Cheakamus Center, and normally we would have gone there, but they came to us. And when the chef came to us and we were outside and we have maple trees on our school site, students were talking about what they recognized and that they weren't big leaf maples by the size and the shapes. And one of the really, and I know I've shared before with a few people, but one of the most powerful moments was when the individual asked, what is the first thing that we need to do? And he was expecting them, oh, you're going to go and tap a tree and you're going to cut into the tree. And the students said, you haven't laid your tobacco. You haven't asked for permission. So the big takeaway for me when I was doing this exploration of math through land was that students were engaging in the stories and they were able to understand the concepts through stories rather than the Western way of using a textbook and going over it with examples in class. Next slide, please. And I used a lot of story. I haven't shown all the stories here that I used, but at the end, one of our journal entries was a reflection of this quote. Nicol, who is Stolo, it says, I want to spiral people down into our old stories so that these people can know who we are and who we will always want to be, as my Uncle Leonard says. So Lee Miracle is referring to Chief Leonard George of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, bringing us back to community. So we had started local knowledge, we had moved and spiraled our way across and learned Anishinaabe ways, and then came back to local community and local knowledge, and understanding that numeracy in math is in the story, and it's in the land, and it's in the community, and it has always existed. So thank you for letting me share one example of something that we tried last year.
Good. Israel, Kwam Huyam Tasquich. I'm also known as Joanne Archibald. I join you today from the unceded ancestral lands of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I come from the Stalo people of the river and have ancestry also in Statlium Nation, the Chakalip community. Well, I raise my hands in thanks and respect to all four storytellers, and in particular, thank Melody and Stephanie for the last two stories, and I am facilitating the discussion for these two stories, and I invite questions, comments in similar fashion to Janice for the first two sets of stories. So let's just first see if there are particular questions, comments from anyone. And while we're waiting, we can look at this picture and, wonder what we see. Maybe where is the mathematics? How does the image or the material in the picture come from the land or the water? We have so many good ideas from, interacting, learning from place. It's like place is the teacher for us, and we facilitate that learning with the students. I found it's okay to have silence. It means people are thinking, wondering. But maybe then I perhaps can start to, for either Melody or Stephanie, maybe to share, if you were giving advice to teachers who might use the similar approaches as you, what might be something that you think is really critical for them to do in preparation for undertaking similar activities. So Melody, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I could speak to that, Joanne. Thank you for that question. I think for us, when we started to want to think about incorporating more place and culture into math, it was a little intimidating. When we thought about incorporating Indigenous perspectives and content into other curricular areas, we all seemed to feel more comfortable. It seemed like more of a natural fit in social studies or science or language arts with, all the different rich stories. And I think we were a little intimidated by math in that we wanted to do it in an authentic way. We didn't want to just be making up word problems about how many salmon we needed to prepare for the potlatch, for example. Like, we wanted to do it in an authentic way. And I think the best piece of advice I could give is just to get out onto the land, to get into place, and to encourage the students to notice and wonder. And I think a lot of the things that we have done have come from the questions the kids had and the wonders and their curiosity. And then my second piece of advice, if I could give one more, would be for us coming up with a theme, and then brainstorming as a group and involving as many different people like Cynthia, who kindly has been working with us the last couple of years, really helped us to see it as not so overwhelming. So we have been working with Cedar for the last 2 years. And at first I thought there would be enough to do cedar for one term. And we are 2 years in now, and I still have so many more things with cedar that I want to do that we haven't got to do yet. So I think a theme helps, and involve all the wise people around you to help you come up with ideas. And start small, start with just one thing, one activity.
Mhm. Thanks, Melody. And to think that, yes, you've been engaged in this theme for 2 years, but you're going deeper and wider. That's marvelous. So how about you, Stephanie?
My piece of advice would be building out Melody said. I always try to find a local story to connect to land and place that the students know. But find a story that kind of centers what you're looking at. So Melody mentioned a theme, but finding a story that kind of brings in what you're looking at, and maybe find a partner to do it with, so that you're not jumping off by yourself, but you have someone to collaborate with, and just take a risk and try it.
Great. Yes, thanks. That having a bit of adventurous spirit, and but getting some really useful practical guidance for how to start, and certainly starting with local, but then going further there to be able to do that comparison as you did, Stephanie, with Anishinaabe and local Squamish ways of harvesting and preparing maple syrup. Anyone? We have some comments where people maybe have not thought about using story to engage in math, and that this is important area that we hope we can spark some interest. And certainly I think other ideas and resources will be posted on the Edith Lando, all of our sponsor websites. I'm sure we'll have the links to this particular webinar and other resources, and the teaching resources that the teacher storytellers have talked about today will be shared on that. And certainly this video, yes, will be on the various websites. And Cynthia said she'd send it to all of those who registered too. So that's smart. So you're going to get lots of good resources. So I think I will pass. Actually, I'll sort of segue into, I think, the next part, which I think we're going to lead to more conclusions. And this session today, is kind of like our different hosts, the sponsors of this webinar. The teacher storytellers are part of the host. We're like one big extended family. And it's like we have invited all of you who have joined us today. I think we had over 80 people in person and about 100 registered, or I don't know, something like that. But it was like us preparing this marvelous gathering that we're so excited to share our perspectives, the stories, to gather people around, to hear the stories, to learn from them in this gathering. And often in our Indigenous gatherings, at the conclusion, we have a giveaway. And so the giveaway, that one giveaway we will have today, is this slide here that has some of the reflections of the teacher storytellers and those of us who are hosts, that we hope that you can take away an idea that's useful to you, because often the gifts we give away are ones that could be used in daily life or for special occasions. And so here are some of the ideas, and I will speak to a few of these, and Janice will as well. And as an Indigenous educator, teacher, mother, grandmother, auntie. I'm so enthused by the stories and the care and attention, that our 4 teacher storytellers, have shared with us today, how they've talked about preparing themselves, gathering the resources, and it could be the helpers, the community members, people who work as educators to support this kind of learning, and then looking at books and videos and sort of gathering all the resources and getting themselves also ready to undertake this important work. And then being out on the land, doing the work on the land in nature, and sharing the excitement of the students, and really showing how the power of place, of culture will be there for us when we're ready for it. And we don't have to be like totally ready. We have to be somewhat open, to receiving these different gifts that are right in front of us in our environment, and then connecting that with math learning. We each have our own gifts of knowledge and expertise, and we combine that with the gifts of the place, of the community, and the culture. So here are some examples on this slide for doing this kind of work. And so I hope that is going to be helpful for those who haven't thought about this before, or maybe for those who have been doing it, to get reinforcement that this is important. We've talked about high student engagement and learning, which is so important. So I want Janice to have a bit of time here too, to share some of your perspectives on the gift that we're giving to the people who have joined us today.
Thank you, Joanne. So as a non-Indigenous educator who's been trying to immerse myself in this work for many years, I always appreciate the gift of time to hear other stories. And to me, that is a gift, being able to sort of sit down this afternoon and just listen to stories of other educators and how they are playing with these ideas. And I wrote down, as I was listening, some concepts that really resonated for me, and that we're connecting all 4 of our storytellers today. So the role of place, obviously, and story came up multiple times. And then to me, although it may not have been explicit, identity is such a big part of this work. And students' mathematical identity is so tied to family and community and culture and place, and creating opportunities and experiences for students to further understand their own identity, I think is so important in all the learning and all the work that we do in schools. And students don't always necessarily see that connection in mathematics. So this work with connecting to place and community and culture, I think, is one way of deepening and enhancing students' understanding of their own identity. And then the big concept for me that I thought just connected all 4 stories was the concept of connections. And, that is one of our curricular competencies from kindergarten through grade 12 in our BC curriculum, that idea of connecting to self, math to self connections, math to world connections, and then math to math connections. And I'd like to invite you to think about one of the stories that was shared today, and think about those opportunities for students to do that really authentic connection making, whether it was to self or the world around them, or the math to math connections as they saw it and experienced it outdoors or in their communities. So those were some of my thoughts that I thought I would like to toss back to you, and invite you to think about what sort of concepts really resonated for you, some of those ideas, and how you take some of those to inspire the work that you might do before we meet again. So thank you for this time.
Thanks, Janice. So we look forward to further comments, that might be put into the chat. And now it's back to you, Cynthia.
Oh, thank you very much. What gifts. Thank you to each of you for your wise words and sharing what you were able to take from across the 4 stories to everybody here. I really appreciate it. And I can see, well, let me just go to the next slide. I can see that the fire is starting to dwindle down. I'm getting a little bit chilly here by my virtual campfire. I really am getting a bit chilly, but I can see that it's kind of time for our gathering to wrap up. And I want to make sure that we acknowledge all of the team members who presented, the teachers who presented their stories. You can see their names here on the slide and their addresses if you'd like to get in touch with them, as well as our organizing team. So we have some other questions in the chats, which is these are really interesting questions too. There's one about urban and rural in terms of looking at, Dana asked about urban and rural resources. And I think I'll just kind of briefly touch on that one because it's an interesting question, because thinking about when I started the session about place having personality and connection, and we're all in different places unless we're kind of right in the same house here together. So when we take up place, we're taking it up in our own ways, and we need to be able to kind of embrace that. So what activity that I might try, or Melody might try, or Stephanie created may not work exactly like that in my own place. So I need to think about how I can use what they've shared to be able to imagine what could be different in my own place. So although these will be, this video is being shared, and we might be able to think of some kind of material lessons that we might be able to post as well to link with this. But in any case, this isn't meant to be taken right up and then applied just in your context. You'll need to think about, what this means for you and how you can make those connections, like Kammi suggested in the first story we had, bringing in the people around you to work with. So I'm just looking at my time here. Okay. This is a part of a series called Reimagining Mathematics Education, Connecting Math, Community, and Culture. This was the first one in our series, but I want to show you this next slide to invite you to attend our next session, which is November 24th, Indigenous Storywork and Math Education. So we have another exciting session planned for you there. And then in January, we have a session on teaching math for social and ecological justice. So we'll have one more, I think it's in February. And we're curious if you have some ideas for a session that you would like to see or be a part of, you can just put it in the chat now or email us, and we would be able to think about trying to make that happen. So if there are no other comments or questions, I want to just thank very much to our team, those who presented, our organizing team, and to each of you for taking the time out from your day and end of day. And as Janice said, this gift of time, we're very grateful for you to make the time to join us in this gathering, and we hope to see you again in November. Leyton, do you want to say a few words to close us off?
Thanks, everyone. What an incredible opportunity to hear from voices from around the province. We look forward to hearing from you in terms of things that you might be trying in your practice in connection to your place with your learners in ways that help us build our relationship with our place, but build our mathematical thinking in context and meaningful ways. We'll see you all in 3 weeks. How could that be? We'll see you in 3 weeks for our next session. You will receive, as long as you've signed up, you'll receive a reminder email with the link for today. You do not need to register for the next session, but more folks are welcome to future sessions. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. Maybe even get outside while it's still light.
Thank you, everybody.